Welcome to the All Sorts podcast. We love taking you on these deep dives. Today we're going way back in time, 2,000 years to be exact, to look at a really cool discovery. A Thracian Chariot, found in Bulgaria. We've got some great articles to help us dig in here. Archaeology Magazine, Live Science, and a few from history websites.
This discovery is really special because of how it was found. It's not every day archaeologists find a chariot in such good condition, buried with its horses. It's like a direct connection to the past.
Yeah, I read that a lot of Thracian tombs have been robbed over the years. I bet that's got to be rough for archaeologists, losing those pieces of history.
Oh, totally. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. You lose so much information. But this tomb in Skastari, Bulgaria, it's untouched. So we get a really good look at their rituals and what they believed.
So like a more complete picture of how they honored their dead.
Yeah, exactly. With undisturbed tombs, archaeologists can see how everything was placed, how things were related to each other, and what happened during the burial. It's like reading a whole book instead of just a few sentences.
It's amazing what we can learn from these old objects and how they can change what we thought we knew about a whole civilization. I was reading the Archaeology Magazine article, and one detail that really stuck with me was the description of the chariot itself. Wood covered in bronze, decorated with these silver-coated figures, like arrows and some panther-like creatures. It sounds mythical.
Yeah, the chariot's decorations tell us it wasn't just for transportation. It was a powerful symbol, probably used for important ceremonies or processions. That silver-coated Eros figure is interesting. Eros is the Greek god of love, and he shows up a lot in Thracian art.
It makes you wonder what Eros meant to them. And if all that fancy decoration tells us something about their ideas about the afterlife, what about those panther-like creatures? Any idea what they might symbolize?
Well, we know Eros pretty well, but the panther-like creatures are a bit of a mystery. Some think they're mythical beasts, from Thracian mythology. Others think they represent strength or agility, maybe even a connection to the underworld. Archaeologists are still working on that one.
Wow, each new detail just adds another layer to the story. But the part that really blew my mind was the two horses, buried upright, like they were pulling the chariot into the afterlife. Can you imagine finding that during an excavation?
Yeah, it's a powerful image for sure. It tells us a lot about how they thought about death and the afterlife. Archaeology Magazine talks about how the pit was designed, one side was sloped. So they probably carefully planned the whole burial. Imagine the horses all decked out in fancy harnesses, pulling that chariot into place. Before, let's just say their final moments. It seems like a carefully planned ritual, not just a random burial.
You mentioned harnesses. Do we know anything about them? What were they made of? Were they decorated too?
The articles don't really say much about the harnesses themselves, but the fact that they mention them makes me think they were important, maybe even symbolic. This wasn't just a ride to the afterlife for some nobleman. It was a statement, a performance, meant to show his status and his journey into the next world.
And then there's this little detail that really threw me. They found a dog buried in the tomb too, chained to the chariot. Now, why would they include a dog in all of this? Was it a pet? Or was there something more to it?
Burying animals was actually pretty common for the Thracians. They believed that animals, especially those close to the person who died, would go with them to the afterlife. So the dog, probably a beloved friend, was buried there to keep him company. And maybe even protect him in the next world.
It's so interesting to see how these details, the chariots, the horses, even the dog, give us these little glimpses into a whole different way of thinking about death. We've got this nobleman, a chariot fit for a king, horses ready to run into eternity, and his faithful dog by his side. Can you tell us more about this nobleman? Who was he?
Well, based on a Live Science article, they found him nearby, dressed in armor. He was definitely a warrior, probably the one who owned this awesome chariot. And like anyone important back then, he was buried with all sorts of cool stuff. Gold coins, rings, a silver cup with arrows on it, more armor, spears and swords.
Wow, a warrior with medication and an inkwell. Those don't exactly scream battle-ready, do they? What do you make of that?
Right. Those everyday objects tell a much bigger story about this guy. I mean, medication means he cared about his health, even knowing he was about to die.
Yeah, it makes you think. What kind of illnesses were they even treating back then? And how much did they know about medicine?
Totally. It's like a snapshot of ancient healthcare.
And that inkwell, not something you usually picture with a warrior.
Nope. The inkwell tells us he could read and write. Maybe he was a scribe or kept records or even wrote letters. It makes you realize warriors weren't just about fighting.
So he was like a warrior scholar, someone who could fight and Right. It really makes them seem more well-rounded, doesn't it? And it tells us Thracian society was more advanced than we might think.
Absolutely. They had a complex culture and social structure, and this guy's burial proves it. They weren't just tough fighters, they had governments and trade. Probably even a rich tradition of storytelling and writing.
It's crazy how something as simple as an inkwell or some medicine can totally change how we look at history.
It reminds us that history is about real people, not just names and dates in a textbook. It's about their lives, their struggles, their beliefs, and what they left behind.
You mentioned earlier that chariot burials were pretty common in Thrace, especially during the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
What was the deal between the Thracians and the Romans? Were they friends, enemies, something in between?
Oh, it was complicated. And it changed over time. Early on, they fought a lot as the Romans tried to expand their empire. But later, Thrace became part of Rome. And you can see the Roman influence on Thracian culture even in this burial. It's like a blend of both.
So this guy with his chariot and horses was living in a time when these two big cultures were mixing. I wonder how that affected his life and the lives of other Thracians.
It's definitely something to think about. You see that cultural mix in the objects from his tomb, like the silver cup with Eros on it. That's straight from Greek mythology, which the Romans loved. But the burial itself, the chariots, the horses, the dog, that's all classic Thracian.
Yeah. It's like he was a bridge between those two worlds, embracing that time of change. We've talked a lot about the symbolism in the objects themselves, but I want to circle back to those horses for a second. That image of these powerful animals buried standing up frozen in time is just so striking.
Yeah, it shows how strong the bond between humans and animals was, even way back then. Horses were clearly more than just animals to work with. They were companions, symbols of power and status, and super important for getting to the afterlife.
And the fact they were sacrificed and buried with so much care shows how much the Thracians respected them.
For sure. It wasn't a random thing. It was a ritual, full of meaning and symbolism. They probably believed the horses would play a big part in the afterlife, maybe guiding the dead on their journey.
It's a beautiful idea to think of these animals being honored like that. But it also makes you think about the ethics of animal sacrifice, something we see very differently today.
It's important to remember we're looking at this through our 21st century eyes. For the Thracians, sacrificing animals was a deeply held belief, a way to honor their gods, make sure people got to the afterlife safely, and keep the world in balance.
It reminds us that ideas about what's right and wrong change over time. What was considered a sacred ritual back then might seem very different to us now.
Exactly. It's a challenge for archaeologists and historians, trying to understand the past on its own terms, without judging it by our modern standards. It takes empathy, an open mind, and the willingness to see things from a totally different perspective.
This chariot burial has definitely given us a lot to think about. The symbolism of everything, how cultures mixed and influenced each other, even how ethical ideas change over time.
It proves that history isn't set in stone. It's a conversation between the past, the present, and the future. Every new discovery opens up new ways of thinking and makes us question what we thought we knew.
Speaking of new discoveries, Live Science also mentioned something kind of sad. A lot of Thracian chariot burials have been destroyed by looters, which means we lose valuable information about the past.
It's a huge loss. Looting doesn't just take away objects. It destroys the context, the story those objects tell. Imagine finding a tomb only to see it's been trashed. All that delicate history ripped apart.
It's like losing pieces of a puzzle. We're left with incomplete stories and questions about the past that we'll never be able to answer.
Exactly. It shows how important it is to protect these sites and preserve them for future generations.
What can we do to help protect these sites and stop looting?
Knowing about it is a big first step. Learning about cultural heritage ourselves and teaching others about it, supporting groups that work to protect these places, and pushing for stronger laws against looting. It's up to all of us to protect these treasures for the future.
It reminds us that the past isn't just about old stuff. It's about understanding our shared human story, exploring all the amazing cultures that came before us, and learning from both their successes and their mistakes.
This Thracian chariot, pulled from the depths of time, proves that. It lets us see a world both familiar and totally strange. To be amazed by the artistry and skills of ancient people, and to think about the mysteries of what it means to be human.
It's incredible how these ancient objects can transport us like that. across thousands of years.
Yeah.
Chariots, horses, even dogs,
Yeah.
connecting us to people who live such different lives.
And it's not just the big finds, the perfectly preserved tombs, it's everything.
Right. Every little piece, every broken shard has a story.
Yeah, exactly.
We often romanticize the past, but I was thinking about how these ancient civilizations, they must have had their own problems too,
Right.
their own struggles.
Oh, absolutely. The Thracians were just like us in a lot of ways. They had conflicts and social problems, and they had to fight to survive. But they also created incredible art and made amazing innovations, like this chariot burial.
This deep dive has really been eye-opening. I didn't know much about the Thracians before. They kind of get lost in the shadow of the Greeks and Romans, but their culture was so rich and interesting.
It reminds us that there are so many hidden stories out there just waiting to be discovered.
And those stories can help us understand our own world better, maybe even give us some guidance for the future.
Think about it. 2,000 years from now, archaeologists might be digging us up, trying to figure out what our lives were like, what we believed in, what we accomplished. What will they think about our fast food containers, our smartphones, our self-driving cars?
Whoa, that is mind-blowing. What will our legacy be? What will our stuff tell them about us?
That's a question we should all ask ourselves. What are we leaving behind? What traces of our lives will future generations find?
This deep dive has been truly inspiring. It makes you realize how connected everything is, how the past shapes the present, and how what we do today will affect the future.
It's a humbling thought. We're all part of this huge human story, a story that's been unfolding for centuries.
And each discovery, whether it's a chariot or an inkwell, adds a new chapter to that story.
So, as we wrap up our exploration of this Thracian chariot, let's remember to keep that sense of wonder about the past and to appreciate how connected we all are across time.
Before we go, I want to remind our listeners that this is just the beginning. The All Sorts podcast is all about sparking your curiosity, making you excited to learn new things, and exploring the world around us, one deep dive at a time.
There are so many stories out there just waiting to be told, mysteries to be solved, and new ways of seeing the world to be discovered.
So join us on this journey. Subscribe to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube and follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads. Let's keep exploring together.
Let's keep uncovering those hidden gems of knowledge, those whispers from the past that still speak to us today, and those threads that connect us all in this amazing tapestry of human history.
Beautifully said. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep digging deeper. This is the All Sorts podcast signing off.